Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So the official translation of One Piece chapter 1052 is out. It's been a while, but let's do it. You guys know how we do the video. We read comments. And then we used to do another thing, but we don't do that thing anymore because I was never very good at it. So we read comments. So it's been a couple months since we've done a comments video, and I haven't done them regularly, even though I know that a lot of people really look forward to them. I hope to get back into this sometime soon. The other aspect of this is I have already been spoiled for chapter 1053, so I'm going to try to avoid topics that I know will happen. Basically everything related to 1053, I'm not touching it. No spoilers in the comments video. And I suppose last on my agenda here, while I have your guys' attention, I want to give you guys an update on my book because I haven't done it publicly in a while because early on, I started writing this thing over a year ago, probably like a year and 3 months, something like that. And so at first I was really confident and cocky that we would get this out in like ASAP. And then reality dawned upon me. And so I didn't want to give you guys fake news, timelines that weren't accurate because I've done that before. And, this is new territory for me, self-publishing, that sort of thing. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I still don't know. Well, I do more now, but it's taken until now for an update. If you guys really don't care, you can skip to about 8:40 in the video, 8 minutes and 40 seconds. I'm a little hurt, but I understand. The book that I've written, I'm separating into 3 parts, which basically means that one book has become 3 books. I could imagine that some people might be dodgy about the reasons why they do things, but you guys know that's not how I operate. You want to know why I do things, and I want to explain why I do things. So there's binding issues for books that are too large, especially in the self-publishing world. The book that I've written is too large, so I needed to split it up in a way that made sense to me. That ended up being 3 books. There's other components of this as well, given that I'm self-publishing. I'm going through Amazon, and so in this world, it's kind of like YouTube. It has its own algorithm, which pushes its product, right? So just like YouTube with thumbnails and titles and how quickly you make your videos and how big your videos are, there's sort of analytics behind that as well. Long story short, releasing a bunch of books relatively quickly is a good idea. So I will do this. The plan right now is to release all 3 books within 3-month time span. So when I finally announce, hey, this book is coming, right? Then the next one will be 3 months after that. And then the third one will be 3 months after that, so that you have them all. Of course, one of the issues is when I first started planning writing the book, it was 1 book and not 3. So you know how books work, especially books that I like Brandon Sanderson. The big boom, all the avalanche of reveals comes at the very end. And so I'm not changing it so that's not the case. So we're praying that the first one and the second one are interesting enough and leave you in a place where you're excited to read the next one so that eventually you can conclude kind of how I like to see it, the arc. 3 books makes an arc. I know that some of you may not be interested in these details, but I'm going to explain them anyway. The normal process, if you want to publish a book, is probably to look for an agent. You find an agent, you submit a proposal in various chapters, you talk to people, eventually they sign you, they give you some money up front, and then they help with the process. I'm going to avoid this for now, which is I'm going full self-publish mode. In the attempts that I have some leverage, right, that people actually like the book, with me doing my work without the agent, so that, if it catches any attention or garners any steam or momentum of any kind, it's like, hey, I don't have to, it's very difficult to find an agent, and I would like to have the ability to choose rather than just take the one guy, if that one guy even exists, who will even have me. We'll see how it goes. It could potentially be the worst decision I've ever made. It might be the best decision I've ever made, but we'll find out together. So as of right now, it appears that the first 2 books are as close as they can be to being done on my end. Beta readers have read the first and offered suggestions, and beta readers are beginning to read the second. I feel very confident about all of these. Obviously, I had the end plan, so the 3rd book, that's still in the process of revision. But in terms of, with 3-month time periods before I have some time to work with, right now, we're just basically waiting on artwork for the first one. And of course, your man Revujo is doing the artwork, and it is going to be amazing. I plan on including illustrations within the book along with the cover, and you guys already know. After the artwork is completed, I can then begin to format the book how it needs to be and order copies to make sure that it's everything that I want it to be, with no egregious errors such as the artwork not fitting or the text on the binding being in the wrong place, those sorts of mechanical errors. But just as an FYI, it's not only going to be available in print form, it's going to be ebook as well. I'll let you guys know about the distribution specifics, like which countries it goes to, things of that nature, when I know them for a fact. I'm really hoping for a winter season release. I think that is tenable. I think that is possible. But as we have previously established, this is all new to me, and I don't know what I'm doing, so there's a great chance that I could be inaccurate. This is not a announcement of release date, but you know, that's the goal right now. That seems realistic to me. November, December. But of course, I'm sure that a lot of you are wondering what the book is actually about. And it's a difficult book for me to label because I love mystery. I love twisting things in various directions. I'm sure you guys know from following the channel. So a lot of the hooks and the tagline could also be spoilers. It's something that I'm still fiddling with. But what you gotta know is it's science fiction fantasy. It takes place on a different world than our own with constant wind, and it can be seen somewhat as steampunk pirates. Because the wind is constant, various groups or factions have ships that they sail on land. I talked about before how when I initially conceived the idea, I hoped to write it so that it could be read equally and enjoyed equally by both kids and adults, but I think that by the time of completion, it falls more into the young adult, but older young adult and adult audiences. It's kind of a brutal world, and it's also kind of a brutal story. But I also made it a little bit surreal and absurd and hopefully funny. These pirate-like people are forced to wear masks because in this world there's this thing called dust that blows in the wind, and dust is also a drug, so there's heavy drug themes in the story, which might just, you know, adults only, maybe. Although I think kids in high school should read more stories about themes related to drugs, personally. But yeah, I hope that's enough of a tease to get you interested in what it is. Honestly, I'm very proud of this. Am I the greatest writer that has ever existed? Probably not. Given this is my first time writing, obviously there's things that I could get better at, but overall the reception has been good, and I feel very optimistic that you guys are going to love it. Tried my hardest to interject some Joy Boy theories into the book. Very character driven. I hope that all the characters pop off the screen, and if not immediately, eventually you fall in love with them. Spliced with some cool plot and some crazy twists and turns. But anyway, I felt like an update was necessary to keep you guys in the loop as to what's going on. That's where I am right now. Anyway, continue to look forward to this. I know that it's been a bit of a wait, but I hope that the payoff is there. So, no more distraction from One Piece. Let's get into the comments. Comment from Dorian talking about my criticisms in the last chapter reaction to the end of Wano. He says, I respect your opinion for real, it's definitely substantiated. However, this arc also happens to be my personal favorite. For me, its faults don't bother me as much, and what we got was still spectacular in my reading experience. Maybe you guys remember all those videos where I went up on my high horse and taught the values of subjectivity. I believe that, and there's a reason that I've preached that. Like, it seems like a lot of people really struggle to understand this, but things aren't necessarily inherently good or bad. Like, people try to define it in these ways, particularly the things that they like are inherently good for whatever reason. It doesn't work that way. We're all individuals. My opinion, which I share with you guys honestly, is very nuanced and very specific to myself. There's things that I personally look forward to, I personally like, and it affects everything. And you guys don't need to feel the way that I do. In fact, if you actually enjoyed that, I would rather I not influence you at all. I'm just reviewing the story, trying to be honest with my thoughts. One of the key distinguishing points I find going through these conversations many times throughout the years is that yes, we're reading a battle manga, but the battle manga aspect of One Piece is not in any way like what I look forward to. So Wano's battle, the battle in Onigashima, is possibly the greatest of all time. I'm not going to say that it is because I don't know, but what I'm trying to say is that it being the best ever doesn't influence my perspective too much because it's just not a thing that I value that highly. When it comes to One Piece, I look forward to the lore, I look forward to characters, plots, mysteries. Those are the things that really carry the story for me. And the battle simply exists at some point in time to get to the next one. That's just the honest truth. And there's a lot of people, in fact, I would say most people probably don't see eye to eye with me about this because, you know, the One Piece is marketed as a battle shonen, right? Probably the truth is that I enjoy One Piece in the anime a bit more for the battles. So if I was reviewing the anime, right, I would talk so much more about how I enjoy the battles because that's just a medium, it's a format which helps me value that thing more. In manga, it's all about the story beats. So I'm less concerned with the battle itself and more about the implications and results of it. So we could go on down the list and I could explain in excruciating detail all the things that I really love and how I love them, but it illustrates a point, right? That this could potentially be the greatest battle in One Piece history. I mean, even me, as not the biggest fan of the fighting, I sat there from chapter 995 till 1045 and was on the edge of my seat. I loved every minute of it. And if that itself elevated this arc for you as the greatest, it would make sense to me. And it's a justifiable, defendable position. It makes the experience of reading this subjective. It makes the criteria for rating it subjective. For me, when I'm rating an arc, it isn't about my experience reading weekly, it's about rereadability. Like if I went back and read the arc again, could it make me cry? How would I feel on a chapter by chapter basis? And the big thing so far, my critique of Wano, is that in reread there's a lot of things which seem significant, that seem like they're going somewhere, but as of this moment it appears not, which will, in my opinion, drastically affect my future rereads of these arcs. It makes me not want to do them, which is why I would rate Wano harshly, as of this second. Next comment from the Evil Rohanite. The government thought that Kaido losing would definitely result in the opening of the borders, which would allow them to invade and annex Wano. They didn't expect him to lose, but they sent their ships over just in case it happened. This comment is a reference to a mistake that I made in the video where I was confused because I remembered incorrectly that the government had sent ships to Wano regardless of who won. But when you look at the actual panel and the text itself, it's very clearly laid out that they said on the freak chance that Kaido loses, then we will annex Wano. So if Kaido won, they didn't expect to be able to get into the country, and that's how it turned out when Momo decided to not open the borders. Aside from the mistake, I think that there's a lot here that is very interesting. Obviously, I think the government knew that the Straw Hats and others were carrying on the will of Odin to open the borders, so that makes sense. If the allies win, then they open the borders. But the other question is how? And it seemed as if the government anticipated that the allies would be able to open up the borders, whatever that meant, if they won. And it's not so easy as just like issuing passports, right? Or like, you know, lifting up a gate somewhere, because if that were the case, I'm sure that the government ships would have been able to get in. It's kind of teased later that Zunisha is the one who can open the borders, I presume by literally beating at the edges of Wano, breaking the rock around it down. So it's like they anticipated some power being used, or Zunisha herself, to open the borders before a victor was even decided. Which seems to me to relate back to some of the prophecy stuff that Odin suggested in 20 years, the borders would be open, all of that came to pass. The government knows something. If it wasn't clear before, it is now. To be honest, it's kind of crazy to me that they even let this battle take place in the first place. Although with the Reverie being attacked when it was, maybe they hadn't foreseen that, and that proved to be the difference. Next comment from Tilki. Izo and Ashura were the ones to die because they were the only ones who had lost their hopes. on Odin and Wano. Izo couldn't bring himself to visit Wano even after Whitebeard's death, and Ashura turned on Wano's people and stole from them. Yeah, in terms of characters that you can argue, perhaps thematically within One Piece, deserved to, I don't know if that's the appropriate phrase, but something like that, deserved to die, these two stand out more than the others. The other one being Denjiro, I would say. So it's nice to kind of build a reason, a design behind the choices in retrospect. I don't think that it changes my opinion on Ashura though. I know that a lot of people disagree with this, but I think that we simply needed more time with Ashura in the story to really invest in him. Like, Ashura's probably the one character out of all of these who dies and, you're just, why should you care? I mean, he almost deserved to die. Looking back on his role in the story, the only thing that he adds, in my opinion, is some history that could have been written differently to exclude him, or his role as sort of the leader of the remnants of Odin's faction 20 years ago, and could sort of watch as they Sanachi'd themselves to their graves. But that could have also been Denjiro just as easily. But more than anything, I think that you could have made me feel something if you had devoted a chapter or a part of a chapter to his mindset, right? Like, he goes through his memories of all the mistakes that he's made, and then he sees the light of what he should have done or could have done differently, and sees these Straw Hats as beacons of hope. Maybe like Pedro, he throws his life away because he now understands that he lost that which he should have kept all along. All of that would have been really strong, and if you word it in the correct way, it could have been a really powerful moment. But instead, he kind of, he gets poked, and then there's an explosion, and he disappears, and then suddenly you find out that he's dead. I can't argue that I like this. Even if his death makes more sense. Almost because it makes more sense, it takes away from the power of the death. Not that we want to see characters that we love die, but it definitely creates emotional moments, and doesn't seem like Ashura was really designed for that purpose. Izo, I thought, was a lot stronger because Izo's specific connection with Kiku, also with the Whitebeard pirates, who we love. Again, I would have liked that moment to be fleshed out more, but it definitely impacted me more. The biggest frustration here about the choices and deaths is Oda went with the characters that I think I cared least about. I wanted to feel something, but I think Oda's intention was for us to not feel heartbreak, counter to pretty much everything that I and many other people speculated for the entirety of Wano. It's like this, when you look back on it and all the events up until now, it just gives you this constant, hopeful, optimistic feeling. And if we'd started to really dive into deaths for a prolonged period of time, I think that would have taken away from that. So maybe that's not a feeling Oda wanted to give us. And if that's the case, he succeeded. But yeah, counter to expectations, for me it felt a little disappointing. But even though it didn't happen, right, at some point the emotional stakes have to increase. And so just because we're not getting it here doesn't mean that forever in the story that's not going to be amped up a few levels. It's just, this is one of the things where it's so difficult, is the closer that we get to the end of the story, the more that our expectations rise, because we're expecting the end of the story to feel a lot like Marineford, right? That's pretty much the midway point, so that's the emotional state that we should expect to be in by the end. And a lot of people are looking forward to it and perhaps expecting it when Oda is not yet ready to get there. As a side note now, looking back on it, again, we could still have more things happen in Wano, so bear that in mind. But as of this second, one of the most disastrous PR lines that we've gotten is the line that, wouldn't Marineford look cute compared to that? It was a very vague statement from Oda. A lot of people presumed, because the subject was Wano, that he was talking about Wano. So Marineford would look cute compared to Wano, and that made our expectations for this arc explode through the stratosphere. And I don't think that helped. And so a lot of people put a lot of expectations on this arc because it seemed like such a big deal to go up against the Yonko, that Oda would throw curveballs at us left and right. Curveballs that made things feel even more serious. He didn't go in that direction, but that's a creative choice. And so we're just back in the wait and see mode. And I don't particularly want to talk about Denjiro because Denjiro has all these layers to him, right? That he was the leader of the mafia for years. How many innocent people's blood is on his hands? You can talk about losing hope or whatever. Maybe he didn't lose hope, but in order to get to this moment, he had to do some crazy evil stuff. And so far, it really hasn't been delved into at all, and I doubt that it will, but I hope that it does. Next comment from Monkey D. Ben. We are probably done with being in Wano, but we are not done with the island of Wano until Momo tells Zunisha to open its borders. This is very true, right? If we leave the island of Wano but the borders aren't open, then Wano itself is still relevant to the story. But I remain skeptical. This is kind of like when people said we left Whole Cake Island, but we might come back. When it comes to One Piece, the location of events matters a lot. So he, visually speaking, is unlikely that we visit Wano, at least in the current state that it is, again, for any prolonged period of time. Another interesting hypothetical, right, is that the borders of Wano weren't opened, Momo chose not to, but you still have this volcano thing that has to go somewhere, you would hope, where we are now. And so a lot of people said, oh, the volcano is going to open the borders of Wano. It didn't after 7 days, but who's to say that Green Bull doesn't show up and then it opens the borders just before or after the world government had their opportunity to enter the country. So we leave as the borders are opened anyway. Next comment from Diogo Felipe. People went from it's the best chapter ever since chapter 1000 to Wano is the worst arc. I think it shows that it doesn't matter how good everything is, if people don't get the ending they desire, then it all sucks suddenly. I don't think that this is entirely true because first off, you got to realize that there's a lot of people that thought that every chapter since chapter 1000 was the best chapter ever, and then they got to the end and still thought that Wano was the greatest arc. This kind of relates to the discussion from an earlier comment, but a lot of it depends on like how you scale things, right? How you rate things. For a lot of people, I would say that it's a realistic take, an honest take, that Wano was one of the most fun arcs to follow weekly ever, and surpasses most everything, if not everything. Actually, I'm just gonna say that I think that Wano is the best arc ever to follow weekly for a substantial period of time. I enjoyed all of this so much. From, like I said, 995 to 1046, 47, that was all peak weekly reading without question. But of course, the caveat in my rating scale is that weekly reading isn't what's most important to me. It's a reread. That's the stuff that I put on the very highest tier, which is all of One Piece, is rereadability. Once you know what happens, is it still amazing to read? For me. How I would amend this to sort of account for how I feel about my circumstances is it's not about the ending that I desire, at least not specifically, right? There's a lot of cool things that could have happened that I would have liked. We argued, I think around chapter 1000, it was still possible that the raid would fail. I know people laugh about that. What a ridiculous theory. I never thought it was that ridiculous. I was in more just camp for a long while. We went through the battle, and then somewhere in the middle there, it's like, okay, no, that's not where Oda's going. I expected them to win. The raid wouldn't fail. They would defeat Kaido. But I still thought that this could be the best arc ever. So it's not necessarily about the ending that I desire. It's about the package coming together at the end. All these little things that Oda had focused on throughout the arc coming together in unexpected ways, delivering moments that I enjoyed. Instead, a lot of the feeling recently is Oda's kind of resolved a lot of these lingering things that we were excited for in relatively underwhelming ways. Could he surpass that with other things from the story? Yes, I thought that way with Momo. I never thought I would cry when Momo was announced as Shogun, but Oda gave an entire chapter for it, and man, that moment delivered. But that is just one aspect of the things that I felt like the arc was about, that the arc had focused on, So it's about all of it, not just one thing, but all of it coming together. That's sort of how I appreciate writing. And I feel like Oda does that pretty much every arc. A great example is, for instance, the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. We go through this arc, and it's not the best chapter ever throughout Dressrosa. We start focusing on Hydrogen and Bartolomeo and Cavendish, and they get significant fights in the story. And, just honestly, right, I would rather have focused on Straw Hats. I thought that some of the Straw Hats could have had greater moments in Dressrosa. Instead, we're focusing on these characters. Not that I don't like them, but comparatively, I'll choose the Straw Hats every time. But then, the end changes my view entirely, because I hadn't even considered a Grand Fleet. That thought never occurred to me. And then we get to that end, and all that time invested in those characters suddenly pays off, and it feels surprising, spectacular, awesome, and adds to the hype of the Straw Hats, right? That's the kind of thing that I'm looking for. Another example, right? We go through Fishman Island, and Sanji's losing blood because of mermaids. And of course, I didn't personally, but a lot of people really hated that. And I was kind of meh on it, but it's a thing that's happening in the story. And then suddenly at the end, you see the transfusion of blood and all the magic that Oda just poured into the end there. And this was all set up from Sanji bleeding and needing a transfusion, right? You can talk about Whole Cake Island, and I'm specifically drawing from post-time skip arcs because I feel like the post-time skip is criticized way more than the pre-time skip, but with the possible exception of Punk Hazard, and I say possible because it was maybe a little bit lesser than all the others for me, I think that the post-time skip has been incredible. Talk about Whole Cake Island, how Oda turned the battle against Katakuri into a training arc, playing on our expectations and our interpretations of the Big Mom Pirates and twisting it there at the end in a very satisfying, unexpected way, that by the time that you conclude that fight, you have a completely different vision of all those chapters prior. A new understanding of the vision behind it, so that when you reread it, you see all these little things that suddenly you're like, I was met on this before, but wow, like he was really going there the whole time. Those are the kinds of endings that just blow my mind, and One Piece does that constantly. We could still get something like that in certain respects, but too many things just sort of were dropped here at the end. But of course, this is just my perspective. You don't have to share it. In fact, it would be very, very weird if everyone shared my perspective. Next comment from Box King. I feel like this arc is becoming a prelude to something huge now. With the possibility of Robin getting captured by CP0 and the world government, this would be a second Marineford War, but this time with Luffy in place of Whitebeard. Remember when we were introduced to the Straw Hat Fleet, when we were told that they would be involved in a massive incident? This could honestly be it. On top of that, we already have a possible immediate confrontation with the world government with whatever happened to Sabo. Robin and Sabo being held by the world government would incite the Straw Hats, and Dragon most likely would make a major move. We already had the first world government and Straw Hat confrontation the first time they took Robin. I think that this comment in part puts into perspective how, I could see that Wano was a bit disappointing, but it doesn't really reflect on the rest of the story yet, because I'm assuming just straight fire from here out, so long as it's not too fast paced. Like, let's throw out some expectations, right? Like, for instance, Elbaf. We all assumed Elbaf would be a major arc, maybe like a 100 chapter, 50 chapter arc. May not be the case now. I think that for your own good, you need to remove all expectation about what might occur in Elbaf other than we have to visit it. But in terms of like the actual content of the story left, it should just be all gas and no brakes. But anyway, to the actual substance of this comment, this seems like the biggest question right now, is do we focus on what's happened with Sabo and the world government first? Or do we, and I don't want to say rush as in the story's rush, but do the Straw Hats sort of rush to the end game, finding Raftel, finding the One Piece, then turn around and deal with these sorts of Marineford-like consequences? I think that it could go either way, but I think that you'll tend to believe that people think that the Straw Hats are going to continue their journey forward, at least in the direction of the Grand Line, to the end, to Raftel, before circling around. But it could go either way. I will say this though, I would be very surprised if the world government is the one to capture Nico Robin. Obviously, at some point in time, Nico Robin's fate is going to be uncertain. There's going to be a threat to her freedom or life. I just don't think it's going to be the world government. If it's Blackbeard, that would be really interesting. So you have Sabo maybe back in Marineford, back towards the red line, and then you have potentially Robin, right? Blackbeard takes Robin to go read the poneglyphs. That could be really cool. That's really the only circumstance that I could see Robin actually being captured. Obviously, a lot of people are going to disagree. I'm just kind of open-minded. I think it could be great in any way. But yeah, as far as the world government is concerned, that would be lower on my list of how I see possibilities. Next comment from Bodega D. Zunisha's silhouette this chapter looks kind of familiar to the giant shadows we saw at the end of Thriller Bark. If you shroud her more in mist and shadows, it could be. I'm just going to point this out because this is a very, very old theory that we have hyped up and talked about, that the denizens of the Florian Triangle at the end of Thriller Bark are Zunisha-like creatures. It seems very plausible, and the implications of this are really cool. Next comment from Visoth. I think Momo's line previously about "I at all costs must not die here" will somehow be very important. Something in that diary that he and Yamato knows could give us a curveball. We all assume it's just that I must become Shogun to open the borders for Joy Boy, but it could be something else entirely. Might have to do with why he doesn't want to open the borders right away. This comment was from chapter 1051, but what's interesting about it that I want to discuss is that at the end of that chapter where Momo becomes the Shogun, the first half of the narrator box, the text is shown as if it's text from Odin's diary or Odin's journal. Sakura petals dance in a future sky where warriors can finally rest their blades. A man, 8 years of age, surveys their progress as they drift in the night air of the renowned land of samurai. He may lack physical strength, but he compensates with his devotion to duty and boundless compassion. This is all framed as if it's from Odin's diary. So Odin straight up predicted that Momo, at 8 years of age, even if he looks older, he's still 8 years old, did all of this stuff. So I think this is probably why Momo knew that he can't die, because essentially Odin had predicted it. And then the final text box is not an Odin journal narrator. It seems like the more normal narrator. This man will one day be known far and wide as one of Wano's greatest leaders. We have just borne witness to the birth of the great shogun Kozuki Momonosuke. One thing that I think that this tells you is that Odin wasn't just like commenting this, right? With the flowery language, it's very prophetic. So it appears as if maybe Toki or something. The other half of this question is Momo decided to not open the borders and we do not know why. This is something that I feel like we do need an answer to. However, it's not something that I feel like we need an immediate answer to, because it really just depends on what the answer is. But I really don't have any good guesses aside from Momo having some experience out in the world and the dangers there, and basically deciding that Wano wasn't quite yet at a state in which it could protect itself. So he may have been encouraged by the journal to open the borders, but ultimately he decided to go against it, which is a cool little detail I would like more exposition for. And finally we have, I think I'm going to make this the last comment, from PB Saffron. Considering the parallels between Odin's death by boiling and Kaido boiling in the lava, we could very well have a last scene with Kaido dying slowly and getting an honorable death by beheading or something. This was also a comment from chapter 1051 before he knew that there was a 7-day time skip, but I'm still, this is so tough, man. I just want Kaido to appear one last time, fulfill some of the lingering threads around him regarding Yamato, regarding his own motivations, concepts of death, something. He doesn't actually have to fight again. In fact, that is, if you think that Kaido's going to fight again, I think that you will 1,000,000% be disappointed, because in no world do I see that being possible anymore. But I just want him to show up out of the lava alive, have a moment, and then get killed. I feel like that alone could totally change my perspective. But yeah, obviously guys, there's a ton of comments and we could do potentially more, but as we have this month break, I might do a couple more comments videos potentially, and dig into, pretend like there was a chapter every week and do a comments video based on old ones just to discuss things in general because I want to bring this format back. And again, I want to apologize for being spoiled because it really limited the things that I could potentially talk about because I know what's going to happen in the next chapter. Honestly, the spoiler situation has gone crazy. I got the spoilers for chapter 1053 before the official chapter of 1052 even came out, which is just something absurd's going on. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much what I had to say about this video. As always, leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Like the video if you like the video, dislike the video if you dislike the video, subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.